Welcome to The Trenches. I'm your host, Rob McCallum. This is our ongoing series of interviews with filmmakers from around the world where we talk to them about their pitfalls, challenges, and what it's like to be involved in the process of making movies, TVs, and TV shows, and basically anything else that's out there. With me on the line right now from Canada is Mr. Geoff Hart. Geoff, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, Robbie. How are you?
Not too bad, man. Good to have you back on the line. It's been a while since we talked, which is kind of crazy because you're producing a film that I shot a couple of years ago, and the distance between us is like 3,000 miles because I'm in Vegas, and of course you're up in Canada, and you're busy as heck right now.
I'm pretty busy. That's the great thing about nowadays, though. You can actually be in two different places and have two teams working in two different cities.
Yeah, and I'll take busy overboard any day, but let's get into the meat of it. Let's tell our viewers or our listening audience, what's the connection between you and I? Why don't you tell everybody when and how we first met, and then maybe we'll talk about that first major project that we worked on together.
Yeah, I found Rob by the side of the road. No, just kidding.
You're the third.
I actually was an individual who was running a company called Long Shot Pictures, and Rob at the time was just going through university. And we ended up connecting together, and we ended up working on our first project, I think, was a documentary. It was a documentary on comic books, if I'm not mistaken. And it was a fun little project at the time. This is back in about 2003, 2004, I'd say, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's right. It was the Canadian comic book documentary. It was being directed by A.J. Williams, who I think will be part of this series as well at some point now or then. He was also the main writer on it, but I remember you were the producer on it, and you plucked me from the crowd of a university audience, mainly because I wouldn't leave you alone, and I just wanted to get some experience, and you kind of needed an editor, and I kind of was just getting my feet wet in that arena. And more importantly, I was kind of willing to work for free.
It was more because when you showed up, you were just such a go-getter. It was so easy to work with you. I think that was really what I actually got. But yeah, there were quite a few students that we had a choice from, and we definitely picked up on Robbie. So.
Wow, things have changed, haven't they? I don't know if I'm so easy to work with anymore, or such a go-getter.
That's fair.
all jokes aside. So that project, I remember, I think we met like in the winter months, like probably like January or February, and production really didn't end until after the one comic convention that happened in Toronto in August. And in between, there was a lot of little shoots. We'd go to a bunch of comic book shops. Bring it back one step just to let the listeners know, this is essentially a rundown of Canada's history, its intersections with comics since the inception of time, its comic book characters, and its artists both known and unknown. And we were chronicling that in a documentary form. So we took basically 8 months to focus on London, Ontario, because for some reason there's 4 or 5 comic book shops in a town that only has like 300,000 people versus like Toronto, which has the same number, but like many million people. But it was like an 8-month off and on production and in post-process. What stands out to you being some of the most difficult stuff about that project, I don't know, across the board? And what stands out to you?
Well, the project itself was, it really came down to going through, basically dealing with A.J. Williams and his knowledge of the comic book world. And that's basically where it started out, because he was such an expert on comics, it just made sense to allow this director to actually direct his own expose on what he loved to do. And because he was passionate about it, I think that's the reason why we kind of all got on board. It was also a good test pilot, really, because back then it wasn't as easy just to go run out, grab a camera, and start shooting a feature film. You were still shooting on video, and there was definitely a limitation in regards to the video technology that was back then. Hence the reason why documentaries were a lot easier to get off the ground than, let's say, feature films or something that's just going to go up on the big screen. But the biggest issues that I think we ran into on that project was just that we were doing it a little bit piecemeal. We were sort of 2 weeks between shoots, and then getting everybody together, getting the actual host out. It's just more of a logistics thing than anything else, because the actual documentary subject was quite easy to do. We knew where the people were, we had great access to it. We knew the convention that was going on. We ended up getting access to that, and we ended up showcasing at the convention, and they really enjoyed the product.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. Just some of the logistics stuff that we learned. I know you were probably a bit more involved in that because I was either cam op and just get the phone call from you guys, and you guys asked me to come out and we'd shoot, or I was just sitting there editing it for a while. Not really involved as much as you guys were with the original plan for when this stuff was coming together. But it did feel like a couple of weeks would go by and it's like kind of what's next, and a couple of weeks would go by and what's next, and even once we got all the footage, we knew that we had something in the footage there, but there wasn't, like necessarily like a master kind of script to go off of. It was like a nice kind of breakdown outline that AJ had done, but there were still some, gaps that we had to fill in there a little bit, like, what goes on screen as far as visuals, when we're talking about the history and stuff, where we didn't have interviews to tell the story. So from my point of view in post, I think that was kind of the pitfalls and just kind of figuring out what worked visually, and maybe some of the background music tracks that we just didn't know what to do. It was kind of a little bit of a guessing game until we got it to where it needed to be.
Yeah. Well, documentaries were still, a little bit in the infancy as well. There wasn't a lot of information on exactly how to do them. If you're doing story structures, you have Robert McKee, you have the Future, you have the Thousand Faces. There's all these almost, I want to call them almost like templates of how to do a story like that. And nowadays, there is actually templates for how to do documentaries as well. But back then, it was maybe not as well known. Nowadays, they say basically you have to do a story, you chase down your story, but about halfway through, your story is definitely going to take a noticeable turn. And it becomes much more almost like a story structure that you'd find from fiction, from actual, screenwriting for dramatic film. It becomes a lot more of a template that's very similar to that. There's actually set structures, set things that you need to do at certain marks, at the 10-page mark, at the 20-page mark, that sort of thing. And if you follow those guidelines, you do end up with a much better doc. But the question is, does your content actually, can you actually fulfill that template with the content that you have? And sometimes you can't. So are you going to be true to the actual content, or are you going to try and force it and try to actually push through with a story that maybe isn't true to your, the reason why you're doing it in the first place?
Yeah,
right. And I think you'll see that in like anything from Blake and Columbine. You'll see it in the individual. He doesn't think that he wants to go see the NRA individual, and then at the very, very end, you realize he has to go do it. I mean, these are the very things that you see in actual story structure. The hero, the protagonist, not wanting to go do something and realizing 3/4 of the way through the film that they have to go do it. It's very similar in that way.
Yeah, I think that's some really good observations. How on the surface they appear like such different forms because one pulls you in to like literally almost like a fantasy world. Whether it's an actual fantasy or not, and the other one is pretending to be like reality, like to its bitter structure, but they're actually using the conventions that we're so used to in normal storytelling. Who's the character? What's his dilemma? What's his goal? What happens if he doesn't succeed with that goal, and where does it go from there?
Exactly.
So the comic book documentary that we did was like one of the very first projects we worked on together. But then there was a bunch of other docs that I remember you doing after. Do you want to just talk about some of those that come to the top of your head?
I can talk briefly about that. We ended up following an individual who was 80 years old. He was in need of a kidney transplant. And 80 years old, he managed to go online, this is about 2006, and find himself a doctor over in Pakistan, and basically booked his own flight and was going to head over to Pakistan to get a transplant. Now, Pakistan at the time was under a lot of criticism for this program that it had in regards to buying kidneys off of very, very poor individuals in Pakistan. And there was a lot, like I said, there was a lot of controversy around it. What I was interested in was, how does an 80-year-old man actually kind of just justify this and have the courage to go and do this? So I wanted to follow his story. And sometimes, when you do have access to it and the individual is very, very open to definitely documenting a story, you go for it. So we ended up shooting him here. We ended up hiring a shooter over in, just a stringer over in Pakistan to shoot him while he was over there. And when we came back, we were ready for him back here again. And we followed his story right through to the end. The fact of the matter is, unfortunately, he did end up passing away from his surgery. And that just kind of really portrayed the dangers in trying to go abroad and actually trying to get some of these types of transplants.
Yeah, and this is a short documentary subject that was called "Waiting in Line." Like you said, based on the organ shortage in North America and the whole problem with donor list or not problem or controversy, and how there are other means, but people recommend against it. And even within the black market of organs, if I can call it that, how there are people in the Western Hemisphere who will arrange for that properly to get taken care of. And like you said, it's a tragic kind of ending that after he comes back and he thinks he's got it made, and he does end up passing away. And the B story to following him is following his daughter around from Ottawa, because he was living in Montreal, and just seeing what she's going through, knowing that her 80-year-old father is halfway around the world as a last hope on one last adventure. And does she agree with what he's doing? Doesn't she? And she doesn't really want to see him on a dialysis machine either, but what hope does he have? Yeah, again, this is, basic kind of character stuff. And I guess that makes it an easy question to answer when I'm going to ask you this is, so you transition from doc to TV and film because the story structure is ultimately kind of the same. It must have been pretty easy. But what I like is that you went to kids and family kind of entertainment right away with a property called The Secret World of Og that many of us will probably remember from the ABC, I think 1983 TV movie. Is that right?
That's correct. I actually had the book read to me when I was a kid. I ended up getting introduced to the book again at the age of 33. Remember just how much I loved it, and kind of like the same thing. The reason why we ended up doing the comic book doc was because we had the access, and it was a subject matter that definitely people were passionate about. Same thing happened with waiting in line. We had the access, and here was an individual who was passionate about getting a kidney, and it was just an interesting story. And when I realized that this was a book that I had read when I was a kid and laughed a lot at, it was something I definitely had to option.
So this is, like you said, this is a book from your childhood and a lot of other people's childhood. That whole idea, that process of optioning, a book, everybody says if you can option a well-known book, you've got it made. And, I don't want to say you don't, because obviously when you did this, you got an animation series out of it that was on CBC in Canada. So do you want to walk us through, just briefly if you'd like, take as much time as you want, because everybody's going to want to know how this happened. You read the book, you must have approached the estate of Pierre Burton, the author. So what happened there? How did you convince him to give you the rights, and then how did the series come about?
Well, the first actual real problem was the 1983 ABC series, because with them already doing an animated series on this project, it could have been a huge flag. But the truth of the matter was that when we went to the actual lawyers and went through the process, we realized that Pierre Burton, just because of the nature of the ABC contract, had actually gotten the rights to his book back because it had been enough time since the last broadcast of the ABC series. So it was a little bit of a technical matter that allowed us to actually create the option in the first place. So the very first thing that I had to do was actually go to an entertainment lawyer and actually get him to draft up an actual option contract. And these contracts are extremely detailed. Like, this basically goes into, all sorts of information in regards to what happens if there's a sequel, what happens, how much is everyone going to get paid, when is everyone going to get paid. It's basically a 16 to, I would say, 28-page document that cost roughly, I'd say, about $10,000 to create, just to make sure that when you do have the rights and you do go to the broadcaster, you have everything covered. And it's an important thing to have all the bases covered when you hit a broadcaster with one of these projects. Because if you don't have all your T's crossed, the broadcaster is going to notice it and is basically going to decide whether or not they want to take a chance on some of the things that maybe you didn't think of. And a good entertainment lawyer will be able to guide you through this. They've done these things before, and I strongly recommend that you do want to kind of hire somebody who's extremely versed in the field, because it does make a huge difference. And once I had the option, I was able to go to Pierre Burton, and I basically sat down with him and said, I'm a huge fan of your book, and I simply want to do the series once again, but I want to do it from a Canadian perspective, and I want to try and keep it as true to the book as possible. And he liked that. He was definitely in his 80s at the time. He had talked about possibly doing a sequel, so immediately I mentioned to him that if there was any sequel that we wanted to do, we could carve that out of the option to allow you to keep the rights to do any sequel that you wanted to do. And he liked that idea too. So we ended up coming to a deal in regards to an option for a 1-year period with a 1-year extension. And then we set out the amounts for that, which I'll just keep to myself for now. But know that, generally speaking, for a book that is of a high caliber, there is a fair amount of payment that has to go out to them. You do not necessarily, as the actual producer, though, have to pay that out of your pocket. You can turn around and get the broadcaster, more or less, to pay for that if you stipulate in the option contract that that's when he's going to get paid. It's only after the broadcaster comes on board. Now, chasing down the broadcaster was a bit of it took a little bit of time. It was actually 2 years going out to a television conference and meeting with the broadcaster over the course of 2 years until she realized that the product was something that the CBC would definitely fell in their mandate. And once she realized that, once I went to a few of the other government organizations that quantify Canadian content, she was happy to proceed with an actual option. Proceed with actually, basically bringing this project to the screen. The first thing that she wanted, though, was to have a meeting with us, and as much as I was meeting with her in September at the time, the first time that she was going to be able to have a meeting with us was in October. And unfortunately, that led to not having enough time to figure out exactly how to do a full 26-episode series. What we ended up doing was just choosing to do 9. And that was just for the first year, and it was just to get the show off the ground because we had the green light from everybody. Everybody loved the project. They'd already had scripts that we'd already drafted. We had submitted those scripts as templates of what the show was going to be like, which they very much enjoyed. I ended up getting 2 animation companies on board, which they were quite happy with. And really, it comes down to getting the option first, getting the broadcaster on next, if you can do that. If you can't do it, then you have to go to the actual, the animation company or the other production company that's going to help you out, sign them on, and then approach the broadcaster again, and just keep banging down the broadcaster's door until you happen to get an actual license deal from them. I had the license deal first, so it was much easier for me to get the actual animation companies on board, because that's kind of the golden ticket. And in Canada, the CBC is much like the BBC in the UK. So once you have the CBC on board, that literally is like the highest broadcaster that you could actually bring an animated series to, so you're going to get top dollar for it. So it's very easy to get other companies on board once that has happened. I teamed up with 2 other companies and ended up splitting the actual rights with those companies in order for them to do the work necessary to get the project on air. And we ended up getting a 155 Nielsen rating, which was higher than CBC's 2 multi-million-dollar movies that year combined. So from a ratings point of view, on November 5th, I think it was, we had an absolute stunning performance on one of our episodes. And CBC was absolutely ecstatic. They turned to us and they basically said, we've never had a 155 rating before on a kids show. And they thought it was great.
It's, it's nothing short of an adventure, really. I mean, and I should clarify, because a lot of our audience is probably going to be of the American variety. CBC, like you said, is like the BBC in the UK. It's a publicly funded entity. And if you get them on board, then it's everything. Making movies and TV in Canada is not like making them in America for whatever reason. Here, people make stuff for profit. There, it's a little bit more difficult. It's cultural expression. There's not as much money going around. And for a guy like yourself, Geoff, to come from London, Ontario, which is outside of Toronto, far away from Vancouver and Montreal, the hotbeds, people told you, you'll never do it. You'll never do it. You'll never do it. But you did it, No,
I got told that constantly. I got told that it was a bad idea, that you're just going to save money and never ever be able to get it back out again. I think you have to take faith in the actual product that you're actually bringing to the broadcaster, though, and just make sure that you know exactly what that broadcaster wants to air, exactly what their mandate is, and as long as you follow that mandate, it's a perfectly viable option to try to bring something to them. It's not always going to pan out, but all you can do is just put your best foot forward and choose a project that you know will be a good fit for them.
Yeah, it's always believe in yourself, because you're going to have more people telling you that you can't do it than you will that will support you, and always do your research. And that kind of ended the Og Saga. Like you said, it was 9 episodes, animated on CBC, and I know that they ran it in syndication for a while. I'm not sure if they're still doing it in syndication or some of their subsidiary channels, or if it's going to get licensed to Netflix and stuff. But from that, you went back into like the film direction, but kind of like independent horror movies. Do you want to talk about that and your first project, The Darkness, which has now been retitled Devil Seed and available for purchase as a DVD? Because to me, that's another huge monumental success story.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the technology has been changing throughout the entire time. So in the beginning, it was like you could do a documentary series for a relatively cheap budget, only because you didn't need to do it on high definition. High definition didn't exist at the time of the actual comic book doc. When high definition did come into play, it was like, no, now you need to kind of do high definition. And then as each tier in technology kept breaking down, you were able to do more and more. And it just came about that in roughly 2009, the possibility of doing something on a red camera would allow you to actually go up and actually have it blown up on the big screen. And it was enough resolution that you could actually achieve that. And it was the first time that, something with 4,000 pixels was going to allow an actual filmmaker to do something on a low-budget level that still could actually have a theatrical run. And knowing this and knowing that the horror genre is one of the best genres for a production company starting out to basically do their first project in, I ended up working with a group of individuals, and we came up with a story idea, and we definitely worked it a lot, got it to a spot where we knew that the biggest demographic that is out there would be willing to watch it, and then we just basically set out the logistics of how to get this thing shot on a low budget level. And when I say low budget, I mean really low budget. I mean basically like literally enough that you were just getting in money from friends and family to get it off the ground.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the stories I like telling people that, if you think about something as you're writing it, you'll be able to shoot it for nickels and dimes. And, don't feel free to divulge any costs and stuff like that. That's definitely not necessary here. But folks, keep in mind, it's nickels and dimes. We're rubbing sticks together to be able to get shots done. And on this film in particularly, I think you guys, as you were writing, you were kind of coming up, can we even shoot that? Or do we have a location for that? And you were writing towards what you got. And that's what a lot of first-time writers or filmmakers don't realize. They'll come up with a script and it's just not possible to do it on some level or not enough that it's achievable. So you guys did something that appealed to the biggest demographic, the teens and college kids, because this is a film about a college girl who gets possessed and shit hits the fan and she's trying to figure out what's going on because the possession keeps getting worse and worse progressively, almost like the way in Poltergeist how the haunting becomes more frequently and devastating in that. But yeah, and you guys made it work. You shot for what, 30 days on that?
It wasn't even that. It was more like 24 days, I'm sure, but it was split up over 2 weeks. We ended up actually taking that same camera that we had rented and actually lending it out to somebody else in the period that we had the downtime, and we got a little bit of money back from doing it that way. Yeah, the important thing about the actual subject matter is exactly that. The cinematographer, who was a great cinematographer, basically would always say that we want to shoot a movie that basically we can hide a lot in the shadows, and there is a lot of shadows in this movie because it's a dark film. It is actually easy to get away with a lot. Your set designs don't have to be so spectacular because you're not actually seeing a lot of the set design. You're seeing a lot of blackness. You're seeing a lot of literally the scariness without actually having to put money into production design in order to do it. The other thing is, you're seeing a lot of things that, you don't need to show, just like when the filmmakers realized that the fact that they didn't have a shark in Jaws was actually a benefit to them because it's actually scary imagining what's beyond the water, what's below the water. It just adds an entirely different effect that when you finally do see the shark, even though the shark is just as cheesy as it would have been if you had put it in the beginning, you see it at the end. You've been waiting for it for so long to see what this thing looks like. You buy into it, and it's a lot easier to buy into. And a lot of horror films that are, do sort of unfold their stories that smartly will actually achieve, an actual rating on their movies that is a lot higher than maybe what it really should be. Keeping the actual the more expensive elements actually hidden away is sometimes an actual better way to go with horror, and that's what we found out with The Darkness.
So with
AKA Devil's Seed.
Yeah, so Devil's Seed, I mean, you talked about comparing it to Jaws and keeping stuff off frame. Part of the result of Jaws is because, like you said, they didn't have a shark or a shark that was reliable, and that that production is famed for the problems that they had with it. This was your first kind of feature film, at the helm as a producer, making sure that your team on set, your director, your DP, and everybody else had what they needed. are there any pitfalls that you can share with us in some major challenges that you guys faced that you had to figure out on the day, on location, and just find different ways to get around it? So maybe talk to us about something that you had planned, something that changed once you got there, and then the unique way that you had to figure out how to beat it.
There was tons on low budget feature that you're going to find that basically works that way. I think one of the main things that we ran into, and what every single first-time filmmaker runs into, is they don't really budget enough for post. So we got through the entire film and then realized, okay, we still have special effects to put in, we still have music to put in, we still have sound design to put in. These things, including the color grading, et cetera, were what held us up. And so for almost a full year after we had shot the film, there was this lag time as we tried to actually cobble together enough actual funds to do the post. We ended up doing the post just sort of piecemeal by ourselves, eventually getting it all done and getting it out there. And as soon as we got it out there, the next problem was just the distribution. But if you mean specifically things that we ran into during the production, I mean, there's so many small things that will happen on the day. You really have to have a very, very tight group. You have to be you have to keep the animosity down, because animosity will be something that basically just eats away at you like a cancer. And you have to just simply work through each and every single problem that comes along. And they're not going to be really big things, but in combination, there's so many of them that they do take a very large toll, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I guess I'll use this opportunity to transition to the film that we worked on. We won't necessarily kind of throw those guys under the bus and risk the opportunity to say maybe they could have done something better. Let's talk about the film that that I wanted to do Unearthly, because I don't care how I look, because I'm pretty proud with where it goes, and I'm open to talking about the process on that, and I've learned a ton. So Unearthly, which was shot the year after Devil Seed, mainly because I was jealous and not shooting with you on Devil Seed. Well, that's true. I just want to keep shooting. You know me. I'll just give me a camera and a story, and we'll make it happen. Which is kind of the story of Unearthly. You worked with me on the script along with another individual, Mike Frusios, in a story capacity. And why don't you talk about that? I guess. I mean, I've pitched the general log line for Unearthly before, so we're not giving anything away. Why don't you talk about how I came to you with Unearthly and what I was proposing to do?
Oh, you came with a script that was very much like an Indiana Jones, but you wanted to do it in a way that would make use of, or at least I think this was my impression of it, or maybe this was my hope for it. You wanted to make use of special effects that were easy to employ, that would give us almost like a supernatural Indiana Jones feel, without having to go into kind of high-end stuff that was going to bog us down in post for a heck of a long time. When we met, I think we had pretty much a draft in our heads figured out, and we eventually got one down on paper figured out. But as is always the case, there's the film that you script, there's the film that you shoot, and there's the film that you edit. And I think when we got to the production side of things, what you came to a conclusion, or the conclusion that you came to was that if you were to put more of the creature feature aspect into this, that it would be a far more marketable thing from a distribution point of view. And that is true. But also with each and every single creature that gets put into it, we end up sort of raising the difficulty rating on the project as well. And that, of course, is going to just need more time and more energy. And as long as you're willing to commit that, it's a great choice to make. And especially if you have the special effects experience behind you, it's a great choice to make. So I think at the end of the day, you've probably made a great choice for yourself by going with so many of the creature feature aspects. But of course, it just means that it's going to take longer to actually bring that project to fruition. I think we're just about at that point now, aren't we? You're just about ready to launch.
Yeah, it's we're literally under 8 shots away from all our shots being done. And this is the stat I keep telling people. We had over 400 effect shots, but the original Jurassic Park had under 100. So maybe we were aiming a little high. Maybe we weren't, but this was made for I know less than Devil Seed in the Darkness. Well, maybe on par, maybe a little bit more once all the post was taken into account on both films. But I guess, what did you think about taking on a script that required so much VFX work or creature feature stuff? Knowing that we'd have to shoot that 6 months down the road.
Well, that's a hard question to answer because I know the technology is getting easier and easier and easier all the time. So you end up doing a project and you immediately want to raise caution in regards to, possibly this is getting outside of our difficulty rating considering the budget we have to work with. But by the same token, you can't really, guess at where technology is actually going and how easy it's going to be to actually employ some of these things later on. A color correction grade system used to cost $20,000, hands down. Now you can go to a company and get it done for $8,000, and if you really wanted to, you could just go and rent specific systems, and basically you could do it yourself if you, were inclined to do it that way. So, the technology just keeps getting easier and easier, so it's kind of a, what was going through my mind at the time. I thought that maybe the story was, good enough on its own. That with just a few minor things, you could actually play it up, and you could have a very, very kind of light special effects, but an effective special effects schedule in the story that we had created. And we ended up sort of going, hitting it right out of the ballpark in regards to how many special effects we ended up putting into it. And it will, bring it into a higher class. The question I have to ask is, could you have easily have just sort of kept it, to that low class, kind of did what we did in the darkness, keep everything to the shadows, and still manage to achieve, a similar success. I think though, in any way, shape, or form, whenever you see even something that's bad special effects on TV, like, let's say, Clash of the Titans, the very first version of it, the 19, it just becomes a cult classic. It doesn't matter how bad the special effects are. People appreciate the fact that you tried to bring, full-fledged fantasy to the screen. And for a lot of us, Clash of the Titans, the very first one, is a very, very valuable film. We don't care that, nowadays the special effects don't necessarily hold up. We appreciate it for what it was. And I think the same thing could be said when you take, on such a big endeavor like we did with Unearthly. You will get that respect factor.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. I think no matter how much money we pour into the effects, whether it's millions or not, it's still going to be CG at the end of the day, and people are going to see through it. But that said, we obviously didn't have millions of dollars, and that's a good comparison that you got with Clash of the Titans. I think, fortunately, because we spent so much time on the story and some of the other elements like choosing the right actors, that all those other elements will help pull people through the maybe less forgivable effects that we have in there right now. Because people recognize that it's a story element that works, and yeah, if they had more money, it could look better, but it'll never look perfect because it's, always CG. I think in hindsight, we could have probably rewritten some of the stuff and tailored it down a little, but it also makes it a little bit more exciting to aim for the sky.
Mm-hmm, for sure. We wouldn't have a Star Wars if, an individual wasn't actually aiming for the sky. And if you think about how many production issues he ran into on the Star Wars, the original one, and you take a look at some of the footage that they ended cutting out of Star Wars, you begin to see this was just a really kind of almost like a low-budget project that just happened to have enough footage that when you edited it together properly, it came out to a fantastic story. And, the same can be said for anybody who tries, that sort of that higher difficulty rating. You just have to realize that, you are gambling. You're making it more difficult for yourself. You have to be able to actually, put it into the ballpark, or else you could not get a distribution deal out of it. And, the lower the difficulty rating, the easier it is for you to accomplish, and maybe the easier it is for you to get distribution. It depends on where you're at, what you're bringing to the table, how long you've really worked the actual script, so that you know exactly how it is that you're going to do it. And you don't necessarily have to listen to the naysayers that will say it can't be done. I've listened to many, many naysayers in my time, and each time I've kind of proven them wrong. So there will be naysayers. There will be individuals who will tell you, like in Memento, that you can't, tell a story in the way that you're telling it, and once it gets shot, it's one of the few times that somebody, gets picked up right at an actual film festival. It depends. If you have something that's new that nobody else has seen before, of course you're going to get criticism for it, because they can only validate something that they, have an actual reference to.
Yeah, I think you're, again, circling around all the right things, and we're talking about, what we did right and what we could second guess and the way things are turning out on Unearthly. Let's talk specifically a little bit. What do you remember, if anything, about production? I remember it was like almost 24 straight days. There may have been 2 or 3 days off that we had in the schedule. What sticks out to you, maybe good or bad, on stuff that we accomplished that we looked at the page and it was like, how are we going to do this? Or, it's like, oh God, how are we going to get through this? Cause we didn't prepare enough for this. The first thing that sticks out to me is we wrote exterior forest. The group goes here, exterior forest, and all of a sudden we had to find like 30 unique forest locations. We took that for granted shooting in like London, Ontario, the forest city, but then it really became like a hunting trip, like a massive location scout, and you would, upload footage to me of, well, here's a spot in the forest, here's a spot, and even right up to production. And through production, we were still looking for spots, and we ultimately found them. So that would be one thing that I think we underestimated. We thought we had easy, but what stands out in your mind of stuff that, looked hard on the page or looked easy on the page and was maybe the opposite once we started going through the steps?
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a production package that I put together for a reality TV series. This is what I remember. And I knew how long it was going to take me to get that done. And once that was done, I was immediately switching over to work on Unearthly. Now, Unearthly at the time had a rough set production date of September 1st. And I think what it came down to is once we started getting into casting, we realized that we couldn't do September 1st because a lot of our cast wasn't going to be available. We had to move it up to August 1st. And this really kind of threw me for a loop because I knew how much production time, if I was just simply working on it by myself without much of a crew to actually assist, how long just the let's say like the locations were going to take. I mean, it just takes hours upon hours to actually go out to film locations to find the right ones, not to mention all the other pre-production and planning that has to be done. So we went into production, oddly enough, kind of the same way that The Darkness went into production. It was definitely behind where we should have been in regards to pre-production, in regards to being prepared. There was definite, props, etc., things that I remember distinctly that we didn't have. Sometimes we only got on the very day. Sometimes we didn't even have it all. We ended up not getting it on the very day and fell through on that. And, in a large respect, that was a lot of my responsibility that I wasn't coming through on. And this is, in a way, shape, and form, if you read up on first-time productions, if you read up on low-budget productions, you will see these little sayings like, if you're going to do a low-budget production, prepare to lose friends. And these are the reasons why. It's not enough money and way too much time for individuals to put things together unless you have a huge amount of experience and you're literally just you're just literally doing it almost intuitively as to what you need next, as to what you need next, as to what you need next. Because I remember us putting in literally almost back-to-back days. I don't remember too much in the way of actual time off, because even in the time off, we were ended up looking around for other locations, etc. I mean, there was very, very little time not to be working 24/7 on these projects, or at least on Unearthly. I think in a lot of ways, Darkness was the same way. There really wasn't a lot of time off. It was just literally go, 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 go. You let some things fall through. Those things ended up not mattering too much in the overall, scheme of things. And you just concentrate on sort of the biggest things every single day. And as long as you got those biggest things out of the way, if a couple of small things fell through, well, that was just the loss for not having, proper pre-production done. But you're sometimes, constrained into going into production earlier or even, for a longer period of time than you actually thought you needed to be. It all depends on the given circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were short on time more than even money. I mean, people were willing to put the effort in. But if we could have had 1 or 2 more weeks, either during production to space out some of the shoot days and just take, another development day, or another 2 weeks, before production start, we would have probably benefited across the board. Because once production started, I was editing at night, because I had a plane ticket to come back to Vegas and I needed all my reshoots done because people were going back to Toronto, some of the actors, people were flying back to the States, again, more cast members, and everybody was just going to be going their separate ways. So we really kind of had to get it all done within that month. So I think, next time around, we'll be having, much more pre-production, probably 4 times, I would say 3 to 4 times pre-production for every, week of, production that we have is the only safe way. That's my big lesson that I learned. But from Unearthly and The Darkness, putting pennies together to hopefully make dollars down the road, you got to work on Tapped, which, had a more significant budget. definitely a bigger presence and imprint. And again, it was shot in London, Ontario. Why don't you tell us about Tapped? And again, you're producing on it, not a writing credit on this one, I believe, but still captain of the ship. So tell us about Tapped.
Well, Tapped, I think really what it comes down to, and I had a company created back in like 2000, and for the longest time, unless I instigated something, unless I went out and I optioned the Peter Burton book, Secret World of Og, or I put forth the funds, or in some way, shape, or form, actually pushed a project forward, there was no projects that were actually coming to the door and saying, "Here, this needs to be made. We would like you to be the production company to do it." It wasn't until you push forward and you actually sort of jump in with both feet and get projects underneath your belt that something like Tapped finally does show up at your door. And it's because you have the track record behind you, and because someone comes to town who has a project, they have a director attached, they need to try to find the financing, and they need to try to get somebody to organize the actual project to be able to be shot. And word just gets around, and everyone points their finger that you're the individual that these guys should talk to. So that's basically how it happened. It was originally a project that was supposed to shoot in L.A. It didn't get the financing down in L.A., so the director, who was from Toronto, ended up bringing it back to Toronto. They started looking for the financing in Toronto and looking for locations in Toronto. But then the director happened to come to the main actor's hometown, which was London, Ontario, saw that it was just like Detroit, which is kind of the model of where they wanted to shoot this film, or at least make it look like this is where it was filmed. And the director, first thing that came out of his mouth was, "Why aren't we shooting it here? This looks fantastic." So then they got in touch with me through a common individual that was known to them, and I put them in touch with a financier who ended up doing kind of an initial phase of financing, and then we still ran around trying to find the bulk of the funds to actually do the film. And it just turned out that as we got more well known, that the initial financier took sort of a closer look at the project and thought that started to believe that this could actually be done. And the problem, there's a lot of problems in regards to production. In LA, productions are done all the time. Now, doctors will turn around and say, to a psychiatrist, "Well, my project is this one and it's doing this well. How's your project doing?" Because they're all investing in these things. In Canada, we do not have that luxury. We have almost no one investing in films. Worse, we have almost no films that we can use as a flagpole to say this is a successful project that made lots of ROI. There's very few films, especially nowadays, that have that banner attached to them. In the early days, there was quite a few. There was Meatballs, and there's been a few that you can definitely recommend that made kind of studio-sized profits on a independent-sized budget. Nobody's really achieved that possibly up until this project that was just made. The footage on the Tap project is looking fantastic, and we do have a lot of distributors kind of contacting us out of the blue saying, "We've kind of heard the rumors about this project, and we'd like to definitely see a first cut of it when it's done." Now, we haven't finished the first cut yet, so we really haven't presented to any distributors, but there are quite a few that are interested. So the project itself became a much larger budgeted project. It was definitely a much more involved project, but at the same time, we actually put in place a crew that was, sufficient to be able to do that size of project. This was not a low budget. It is a low budget, but it was not a low budget in comparison to the things that we had done before. Before, we had individuals who were wearing like 5 or 6 different hats. On this project, pretty much everybody wore, a single hat, and that was their responsibilities. And they may have helped out on a bunch of other different things, but, their core responsibility was whatever they were contracted to do, and that was just about it. And that model really is the only model that is ever going to work, easily and efficiently on the film set. And that doesn't say that we didn't have a huge amount of problems on Tapped. Every single project will always have its problems, and every single time you just have to keep your head on straight and work through them. And I don't think you're going to find even in Hollywood that a lot of the stars are going to say that there weren't problems on any project that's been worked on down there. If you have really good leadership, which I hear is what happens on a Clint Eastwood project, and really good food, then you usually have a really good experience. And I think that's what it comes down to.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too much into Tap because I don't want you to have to give away too much because distributors could be listening and I don't want details going out there. Plus, I don't want you to step on toes of directors and stuff who are obviously aren't on the line and unaware of this conversation going on. So maybe we can revisit Tapped in depth when it gets released. We can get like a roundtable going with all the key creatives, yourself included. I'm gonna wrap things up a little bit now, and the way we wrap up all these interviews is by playing a little bit of a game, a little bit of a fanboy kind of game and whatnot. So it's just 3 questions, really easy. The first one is, you get a chance for 5 minutes with Spielberg. What kind of project do you pitch him?
I pitch him anything to do with sci-fi, fantasy, something that is sort of the budget, the big tentpole budgeted projects.
Anything kind of come to mind? Like, do you want to pitch him like another Indiana Jones, something that's Close Encounters, or?
It would be much more, I think, of a magical fantasy type of thing. Again, only because the special effects are opening the doorway to doing a whole bunch of things that normally look pretty cheesy on film. Now you're able to do them, and they do look really, really good. It would either be a space or a magical fantasy.
Okay. Question number 2. You get to work on any film, past, present, or future. What film is it, and what role do you want to work on? Or like, what role do you want to inherit?
Strangely enough,
I know it's hard.
It is very hard. There's just too many movies that you love that you want to immediately throw out and say this is the movie that it would be, but it's just because you love the movie. It's not because you're thinking about, actually have been working on it. I think for somebody who loves Muppets, and I won't mention any names, there's certain easy answers that come to mind. With someone like myself, I have to imagine it actually would be sort of more of a Lord of the Rings type of thing. I think that would have been a heck of a lot of fun. Certainly the landscape is definitely worth, it would be an interesting landscape to actually be able to shoot in. And the epic nature of it would definitely be something that would be up my alley.
What role would you like to have played within that film crew?
I'd still be a producer, though. Yeah. So I'm a producer at Hart. Yeah.
Is that like a pun? A producer at Lord of the Rings or nothing else. That's it. That's your demand, Hollywood.
Right, so.
Okay, and the third and final question, and it's really fanboy in nature. If you could be any superhero, who would it be, why that character, and how would being that character help your film goals?
Who is the individual who can teleport in X-Men?
Nightcrawler?
Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler would be the easiest answer. It'd be so easy to get funding if you just had those powers.
So you would just like poof around and teleport to all the different people that could possibly give you funding to get shows off the ground.
What, to be able to actually meet the people? No, you just jump inside the bank vault. That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, okay. Well, we know some sort of sinister motivations here. Attention bank managers, don't leave the vault unlocked while Geoff Hart's around. Well, Geoff, I'm gonna thank you for being on the show today. A lot of really good answers, a lot of good kind of outside the box, building films, going through the pitfalls, everything from optioning to option purchase agreements, docs, TV, micro budgets, and a little bit more indie budget stuff. There's a lot of people that are gonna glean some good information from this. So thanks for being on the show.
No problem. Thank you so much, Robbie.
So this has been The Trenches from the Wired In Network. We'll catch up with you next time, and we look forward to who we'll be chatting with then in this ongoing series of interviews with filmmakers from around the world.